Greetings, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Dharma Junkie Podcast. This episode's going to be a little bit different. This is something I haven't really tried before, so we're going to grow together on this one. I don't have an interview in this episode. What this episode consists of is actually a Dharma talk that I gave on the first foundation of mindfulness at a meditation group I facilitate in Pensacola, Florida, called Gulf Coast Dharma. It consists of a Dharma talk and a guided meditation generally, followed by a discussion. So if you ever find yourself in the area and feel like sitting in silence for a while, stop in. Every Monday, Empathic Practice, Pensacola, Florida, 7 p.m. As I said, this is a talk on the first foundation of mindfulness. I hope you enjoy it.
You might catch yourself sliding in and out of a hallucinatory state. Just relax and enjoy it. Just relax and enjoy it.
This is an experiment in mind formation. Information. Forming, controlling, operating your mind and your brain. We're using digital techniques to overload, scramble, confuse, unfocus your mind. The natural state of the brain is chaos. Chaos is beautiful.
Tonight's topic is going to be on the first foundation of mindfulness, and that's mindfulness of breath and body. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those, but I think I want to focus on the breath. And the reason I want to focus on the breath is because it really is at the core of this practice. The breath is generally where people start when they start meditating, and generally where people always come back to, no matter what their level of experience is. And so I think that it makes sense to explore what makes it so important. This practice comes from one of the medium-length discourses, also called the Majjhima Nikaya, from the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon was a Buddhist text that was translated in the late 1800s, and the first translation was like 57 volumes. It's literally like a bookshelf full of encyclopedias. So there's a lot to it. And of course, I said this is the medium-length discourses, which means that there are also short discourses and long discourses. But this particular one is called the Satipatthana Sutta. The Satipatthana is the discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. This word sati literally translates a couple different ways. The first translation is mindfulness. But the second translation is the one that I really prefer, and that's just to remember. And that's just remembering where you are and what you're doing in any given moment. Just remembering the present time experience. And so the purpose of mindfulness is simply to pay attention and to fully immerse ourselves in the phenomena that life has to offer, all of the experiences that life has to offer. And by paying attention to the breath, we can break our addiction to the thinking mind and move back into the present time experience. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into meditation. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Buddha said about this practice. And then I'm going to talk about a few practical tips that everybody can kind of take away to apply in their own daily lives. Let's see how I started meditating. I was married to, I don't want to say any negative things, but a very difficult person. This was several years ago. And this person had a daughter. I'm assuming she probably still does. Although with her, who could tell? Anyway, we split up the day after Christmas in 2012, which was rough for me. I dealt with the breakup better than I dealt with the loss of the stepdaughter. That was really hard for me. I'm not sure if everybody here knows, obviously, but for the people that don't, I am a cancer survivor. I had childhood leukemia, and I can't have children of my own. So the loss of her was a pretty big hit to me, and I did not deal with that loss very well. I turned to substance use. I had already been drinking heavily at the time, And that just progressed and things got worse. I eventually started using opiates and eventually found myself getting arrested and charged with a crime for which I was not guilty, but I was guilty of obviously using, so it put me in the position to be arrested in the first place. At the time I was arrested, I was already on probation, and so I was not able to bond out, which I normally did. I'd been arrested a litany of times before that, like a lot, like an excessive amount. Yeah. But I always just bonded out and handled it from outside of the jail. I did it that way and took probation and moved on with my life and did the right thing for long enough until I could go fuck it up again. And, which I did. And I really did this time. So here I am sitting in jail. I was charged with conspiracy to traffic heroin, over 28 grams, but less than 30 kilograms. That carries a 25-year minimum mandatory sentence. It's not really relevant, but I had no drugs when I was arrested for this crime. So here I was in jail. No bond, looking at 25 years. Going batshit crazy because I didn't know what was going to happen. Just the uncertainty of my future was overwhelming. And I was at a local facility. I was at the Escambia County Road Prison. So I would get to go out to work every day, and there were a lot of times that I thought I could just get the fuck out and just take off. And I could have done that really easily. But I knew that would have just made things worse, and I knew I wasn't guilty of what they charged me with. So I stuck around. And then I started thinking about what I would do if I got the 25 years. How would I live my life incarcerated for the next 2.5 decades? Day for day. No game time on that. Minimum mandatory. And I thought about suicide. A lot. It plagued every moment of my existence at that point. And then I found this book on a bookshelf one day while I was there just kind of hanging out. And it was this book called We're All Doing Time. And it was kind of geared towards inmates. It was by an author. His name was Bo Lozoff. He passed away in 2001 from a motorcycle accident. But he was kind of buddy-buddy with Stephen Levine and Ram Dass. And so he's kind of that whole late, mid-70s spiritual movement. And they gave some basic meditation practices and some yoga asanas and stuff. And it was treat this time while you're incarcerated like it's your ashram, like it's your monastery, and just live your life as a monk during this time. So I said, I can do that. That gives me something to do. You have nothing else to do. It gave me something to do. It gave me something to focus on. And so I started meditating in one of the probably worst places you could pick to meditate, which is a loud-ass county jail.
Underdome.
Yeah, that. Pretty much that. And I could have viewed that as a distraction to my practice, but I really think it helped strengthen my practice because I was so dedicated to doing it, even through all the noise and the chaos, that it really, really sharpened my concentration practice. And, so I started meditating as an escape. It was an escape from a mental and a literal physical prison. And I just had to get out. I had to get out somehow. I was either going to run away, I was going to kill myself, or I'm going to sit on a cushion. So I chose the latter. And so here we are. Obviously, I didn't get 25 years. I'm here. I only got a year, and I got charged with possession, which for a long time I held a lot of resentment about because I didn't have any drugs on me when I got arrested. And so, really, I wasn't technically guilty of possession, but...
How'd you let go of the resentment?
I was guilty of using drugs. And I had to forgive myself for that and accept that the past is the past and there's no way that I can change that. So just by using drugs in the first place, I put myself in a position to be arrested. Whether I had anything on me at the time or not is irrelevant. Yeah. I put myself in that position. You sit in the barber chair long enough, you're probably going to get a haircut. Sure. So, like I said, so I use this
And it led you to meditation.
Exactly.
Wow.
So I use this, like I said, as an escape from a mental prison. You know, does anybody else just felt like you were a prisoner of your thoughts? You're just trapped in your own head? Right. I thought I was the only one. And then I started hanging out with other people. So there's this John Kabat-Zinn quote that I really like, and I think it's pretty relevant. So when we commit ourselves to paying attention in an open way, without falling prey to our own likes and dislikes, opinions and prejudices, projections and expectations, new possibilities open up, and we have a chance to free ourselves from the straitjacket of the unconscious mind. And that's what this practice does. That's what mindfulness does. It brings us to a place of non-judgmental present time awareness. And by concentrating our attention on the breath and observing the body, we can get out of our heads long enough to see what's really going on around us and kind of just turn the volume down a little bit. As I said, this is the first foundation of mindfulness in what is 4 foundations in the Satipatthana Sutta. And this is breath and body. And so I'm going to talk about why we start with the breath. I think the reason we start with the breath is because it's always there. It's always present. It's been there for all of our experiences, whether you think there were good experiences or bad experiences. The breath has been there. It's the easiest concentration point we have. It's the easiest to access. We don't have to look for it. It's right there waiting for us. We're always breathing. And we're always paying attention to something. But we're not always mindful. And so with this practice, that's what we learn. We learn to bring ourselves into this present time awareness and to be mindful of the moment. And like I said earlier, I think that most people start with mindfulness of the breath, and even the most dedicated practitioners always go back to it. And there's actually a story in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's one of the only stories I've found reading the suttas where the Buddha actually talks about his personal practice. And so Buddhism originated in India 2,600 years ago, roughly. And at that time, there was a lot of different spiritual practices happening. Not just Buddhism, there was Jainism, Hinduism, and several others. So there's a group of Buddhist monks walking through a village. I'm not sure which village. I'm sure it was probably somewhere in northern India because it's where this practice was focused for the most part, at least in the beginning. And these monks come across another group of practitioners of a different spiritual practice. And this other group says to the monks, they're like, hey, you guys are with the Buddha, right? Like, yeah, that's our dude. Yeah, that's our dude for sure. And like, well, does the Buddha meditate? Like, yeah, he meditates. Like, well, why does he meditate? If he's this fully realized, fully awakened being, why does he need to meditate still? They're like, we don't know. It's a really good question. So they go back to the Buddha. Like, yo, man, you meditate. Like, why do you meditate? He's like, well, I think it's a noble, worthy practice. He said, okay, well, that's cool. But like, when you do meditate, how do you meditate? He said, when I meditate, I focus on mindfulness of the breath. He said, I think it is a worthy, noble, perfect place to dwell. So even the Buddha, fully awakened, fully realized, still right back to the breath. And I think that's super important because it's really easy. There's so many different meditation variations out there, and they're all very useful in some way. But I think that this mindfulness of the breath and this learning to refocus our mind and concentrate on something other than discursive thoughts and exterior stimulus is a really helpful thing. It really helped me, and it still does every day. Like I said, this teaching comes from the Satipatthana Sutta, and it gives really direct and specific instructions on how we do this practice. So I'm going to read a little bit of the Satipatthana. because I think it's very pertinent to this teaching. And it starts as so. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country, where there was a town of Kurus named Kamasadama. There he addressed the bhikkhus thusly. Okay, first of all, this word bhikkhus, it's generally translated as monks, but in this context, it really means anyone that's practicing. So when we say bhikkhus, he just means us. It's like literally talking directly to us. He says, bhikkhus, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the liberation of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of Nibbana. I think that's also very important. This is the direct path for the liberation from sorrow and lamentation in regards to the world. So then he goes into how we contemplate the body. He says, in regard to the body, one abides contemplating the body diligent, clearly knowing, and mindful, free from desires and discontent in regard to the world. And how, bhikkhus, does one abide contemplating the body as a body? Here a bhikkhu gone to the forest, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut, in this case this is our empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, set his body erect, and established mindfulness in front of him. Ever mindful he breathes in, ever mindful he breathes out. So it's very specific instructions. Sit down, legs crossed, erect spine, mindfulness in front of you. And when he says mindfulness in front of you, I really like to think that he's referring to the breath, because the breath is always right. So he goes on with further instructions. Breathing in long, one understands I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, one understands I breathe out long. Breathing in short, one understands I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, one understands I breathe out short. One trains thus. I shall breathe in experiencing the whole body. One trains thus. I shall breathe out experiencing the whole body. One trains thus. I shall breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formation. One trains thus. I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. And so he's really left out the guesswork. There's like no guesswork involved. He's given us precise and cohesive instructions on how to fully engage in the practice of mindfulness of breath. And it's important to note his use of the word training, because that's exactly what this is. This is a training. The repetition that's used is there for a reason. And I'd like to think it's because he thought it was important that we know this stuff. So he just beats it in. Mindful, knowing, clearly knowing, abiding in mindfulness. And so we train the mind in this repetitious manner, just like we're studying for a test. You just want to commit it to memory. Just constantly coming back to the breath, constantly coming back to the breath. And this aspect of training the mind is in direct correlation with what neuroscience really has to say about meditation. And I mean, the studies have shown that with an active meditation practice, we can increase our attention, our memory, executive function, cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, as well as an overall reduction in reactivity. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty into reducing my reactivity. Seems to be a pretty big thing for me.
I'm bad at it, but I always do it guided. But the first thing I always notice is reduced anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately following. It's like the difference between being tired before you go to sleep and then waking up and feeling refreshed. There's something
good
to it.
point.
That's good insight.
You've definitely helped my anxiety.
For sure. Yeah, and so by committing to this practice, we're literally retraining and reprogramming our brains. The brains are nothing but a computer. And fortunately, we have the ability to reprogram them if we want. And so let's practice with the breath for a minute. We're going to work on establishing an anchor. And what I mean by establishing an anchor is simply finding the spot in the body where you feel the breath most strongly. That could be the nose and the nostrils. It could be the mouth or the throat. It could be the chest or the abdomen. just breathing in naturally, just pay attention to where you start to feel the breath the strongest. And we're just going to do this for a couple minutes to establish our anchor. All right. Everybody can find your anchor? Excellent. And as I said, this particular sutta is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. This is the first, breath and body. And we've talked about the breath a little bit, so now let's talk about the body. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit more of the Satipatthana, just to kind of give you what the Buddha said about it, and then I'll give you my take on what this means to me. So, in this way, he abides contemplating the body as a body internally, or he abides contemplating the body as a body externally, or he abides contemplating the body as a body both internally and externally. So how do we contemplate the body externally? Well, for me, it can mean a couple different things. Like Joanne said, it could be our senses. It could be our sense doors, as they're referred to in this practice, of which there are 6 sense doors. As far as mindfulness of the body is concerned, we're only concerned with the 5 that we know: feeling, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. I also like to think that it means contemplating other people and taking other people into consideration. Contemplating other people's experience as they walk through this world. So I think that's a pretty important part of not only this practice, but of life in general. And then he moves into the mindfulness of postures. It says, again, bhikkhus, when walking, a bhikkhu understands, I am walking. When standing, he understands, I am standing. When sitting, he understands, I am sitting. When lying down, he understands, I am lying down. Or he understands accordingly, however his body is disposed. And from postures, we move into fully knowing and full awareness of what we're doing. Again, bhikkhus, a bhikkhu is one who acts in full awareness when going forward and returning, who acts in full awareness when looking ahead and looking away, who acts in full awareness when flexing and extending his limbs, who acts in full awareness when wearing his robes and carrying his outer robe and bowl, who acts in full awareness when eating, drinking, consuming food, and tasting, awareness when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. In this way, he abides contemplating the body as a body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. And he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And that too, bhikkhus, is how one abides contemplating the body as a body. And so this is saying, for me, that this practice is not just limited to sitting on a cushion. And one of my teachers is very quick to point out to me, only 1,000 times every time I see him, that meditation and daily life are not separate things. And it's just how we carry ourselves throughout all of our experiences. It can be really easy to get caught up in the vicissitudes of life, in the peaks and valleys, in the stories we tell ourselves. And so there's another thing that he taught me, and that's to look for bells of mindfulness. And anything can be a bell of mindfulness. If you have your phone set for when your notifications go off, but that can be a bell of mindfulness. To just, you hear your notification go off, and you go, oh, You just take a minute and bring yourself back to the present time experience. Just drop whatever thoughts you're having, any rushing, any lamentation, and just be here now, like I'm listening, right? I like stoplights. Stoplights are one of my favorite all-time bells of mindfulness because it gives me like a full minute to just sit there and just come back to the here and now. And this foundation continues on the contemplation of different parts of the body. The Buddha actually mentions 32 specific parts of the body that you can contemplate on. He mentions the hair, he mentions the fingernails, the skin, all the different organs, the spleen, the liver, the kidneys, the sinew, the cartilage, feces, urine. This part of the sutta is actually called the foulness of the body. We contemplate on the foulness of the body. People are kind of gross. Animals in general are kind of gross, right? A friend of mine actually went to a Dharma talk that was by Thich Nhat Hanh, and Thich Nhat Hanh did a 2-hour Dharma talk on mindfulness of pooping. Literally 2 hours of Thich Nhat Hanh talking about mindfulness of the butthole. So, and it was, about the experience and the shame involved with it and the smells and just the disgusting nature of it. And then from there, after he goes on through these 32 parts and contemplating all the different parts of the body, he goes on to contemplate the impermanence of the body.
Yeah.
And picturing the body as a corpse, dead and blue and rotting in the charnel grounds. Fully knowing the 3 marks or characteristics of this existence. And by paying attention to the breath and being mindful of the breath and body and really exploring the rising and falling of the breath, we get a deep insight into the impermanent nature of not only the breath, but of all things, of all of human experience. Nothing of this world is permanent. And because nothing is permanent, nothing's really reliable. So then you get the imperfect nature of existence. And it's going to happen whether you like it or not. And thus we have the impersonal nature of existence. And those are the 3 characteristics of existence: imperfect, impermanent, and impersonal. Which is kind of a bummer. But not really. Yeah, dukkha. And so we talked about how mindfulness of the breath is, as the Buddha said, the direct path to liberation. We went over his instructions on how we should practice. And I've given you just a couple practical tips on how to integrate that into daily life, both on and off the cushion. So there's this other John Kabat-Zinn quote that I threw in because I really liked it. And I think it's like one of the best quotes I think I've ever heard, especially as far as this practice is concerned. Sorry, I'm grinning like an idiot, but I think this quote's so good. So you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And that was the first foundation of mindfulness. I hope that you enjoyed that talk and took something away from it. It's my intention to release these talks as I give them, so that should be once per week. As I said at the beginning of the episode, each talk also is accompanied by a meditation, which I will also include in a separate release simultaneously with each talk. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. As always, thanks for listening. This has been Dharma Junkie. Namaste.